Hey, Fantasy Film Fest. I am Paul Gandersman here
with Peter Hall.
and we co-wrote, co-directed the film Man Finds Tape, which is playing at Fantasy Film Fest.
And we are so happy to be there. Looking at the lineup this year, the fact that Man Finds Tape is among such great films is a huge honor.
I think you're going to be the first audience outside of America to watch it, which is really exciting and curious to hear.
What fascinates you about found footage?
For us, it kind of started out of, it was a puzzle. We started just with those parameters. What would a fake documentary look like and feel like? And found footage is a part of that. But we really wanted to make something, and the film is a faux documentary, not just a found footage movie. And we really wanted to focus on something that kind of had the people making the documentary, their kind of character arcs and everything was all part of it. We never wanted there to be a moment where you go, why are they still filming? So we kind of talked about the things we didn't like and then built a story into that, if that makes sense. Peter, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, and I would just say for found footage in general, one of the things that I really like about it is it's a genre where the audience, every film you have a sense of suspension of disbelief. But there's something specific about found footage that I think the audience knows the general parameters of how it works. And there can be a lot of fun to watching a filmmaker try to figure out how to subvert expectations or justify things happening. It's almost like you're watching a movie with like an extra set of rules on top of it that can be fun to play with. So I really like movies that get inventive with the format, the same way that Late Night with the Devil did. The way that hopefully we did. But I think there's sort of an extra buy-in that the audience has that can be fun to explore and play with.
The format itself is just such an interesting puzzle because it's kind of, which we really discovered in writing, production, and in post-production, especially in post-production, how much flexibility you have just to kind of change the order. When it's a documentary, right? A documentary is... Oh, actually, let me back up. So like one of the early drafts we wrote of the film, we kind of finished it and read through it. And we were like, this is just the events that happened in order. That's not how a documentary would necessarily be cut. Now let's basically start over and treat this draft as these are the events. Now, how would we cut that into a documentary? And then it kind of got recut on the page a million ways and then actually in editing a bunch of ways. And I love that flexibility because there's also elements that we figured out in post-production. There's a lot of audio elements and like voicemails and things like that were not written in there that we kind of figured out in post. And all we had to do was jump on Zoom with some actors, get the audio and lay it in. And it gave us a lot of flexibility to play.
Yeah, we wrote it. The sort of guiding post for this style for us was if someone had found all of this footage, how would they make a documentary about it? So as Paul said, we wrote a version where these are the events. This is what happens. Okay, so we know we're going to film that stuff, but now we have to write how someone would take that and turn it into a documentary, and how and that part was very, very difficult. Writing a fake documentary is a lot harder than you might think. It seems like I think for found footage in particular, people think it's a cheap and easy way to do it because you don't have to have a 500-person crew. You can do stuff on iPhones if need be. You can strip it down, which is very true. But it's very hard to do that and still feel cohesive and big. And it's also, and then when you add in the fake documentary aspect to it, it's very hard to write a narrative structure and a narrative arc for characters in a documentary when they're making it about themselves. So there was a lot of layers to it, but that's also kind of what intrigued us because the meta aspect of it, the whole idea of falling down these rabbit holes of investigating footage that you're a part of, it all creates this feedback loop inside the film itself, which we thought was really interesting.
How did you find your clues? How did you find your elements for it?
So we wrote it to be something that we could do entirely ourselves, if need be. And then Paul and I had seen, or maybe it was just I who had seen Justin Benson and Dave Lawson's most recent movie, Something in the Dirt at the time, Something in the Dirt, which if anyone has seen that film, it has a similar lots of mixed media usage in it, different cameras, lenses, all kinds of stuff. It has a faux documentary aspect to it as well. So we kind of rolled the dice and reached out to Dave Lawson, who produces for Rustic and Justin and Aaron's movies, and who I had met at South by and only knew in passing, didn't really know him that well. It was a bit of a gamble to reach out to him cold, and said, hey, would you mind reading this? Paul and I are about to make this. I would love to pick your brain about the logistical complexities that you guys ran into. Like, what are the red flags that we should be looking out for when making this kind of a production? And thankfully, he said yes, he would read it. Even more thankfully, he came back and said, I really, really like this. I would love to be involved. And, whether it's just giving advice or actually producing. And so then Paul asked, well, could it be a Rustic production? Would Justin and Aaron also want to be involved? And Dave gave us a bit of a caution. He said it was very rare that the three of them all want to do a project together, that a true Rustic production has to have all three of them, but that he would pass it along. And then we didn't hear anything for a couple months. And so we kind of just assumed, like, well, I guess they weren't into it. And then right before South by Southwest 2023, they reached out of nowhere and said, hey, can we hop on a call? And so we were all chatting, and it was 10, 15 minutes or so into the call that Aaron Moorhead was like, oh, by the way, we love this script and we want to make the movie. So it came together in that sort of dream scenario where they brought a lot of credibility to the project, that since even though Paul and I have made films before, we haven't directed before, and that gives people a lot of caution. And so I think having them on our shoulder and holding us up allowed other people to take the project seriously in a way that they wouldn't have. But most of the crew was kind of in place at that point. We had David Kuhn, the cinematographer, who Paul had worked with. Paul's wife, Ashley, is the production designer, costume designer, producer. She did 1,000 different things on it. We didn't have a ton of the cast in place at that time, but we had already been moving forward as if we were doing it entirely on our own. So then once they came on, it really dialed everything up several notches.
If we take the character of Lucas, what were the most important aspects of his character and how you developed?
Well, I think what we were intrigued by was he's not the narrator in the film, but like unreliable narrators in general are fascinating. And a character who is kind of investigating his own history and past, but it's obscured to him and he doesn't know why, just felt interesting, right? Because there's many films about someone investigating a thing, investigating something, but through media, but planting themselves in it as the center of it, and having to look inward, but that kind of those memories being blacked out was really intriguing. And I think, we were trying to find the balance with him of not making him a sympathetic character, but not a perfect person. We wanted him to be flawed and have to reckon with that and realize that, because again, in this format, it's really tricky crafting character arcs that feel believable, because it's kind of that balance of like, if everybody has every perfect cinematic beat and moment captured on it, all of a sudden the realism of the thing stops working. But if they're all just carbon copy douchebags, like just being mean to each other, you're not going to emotionally connect. So it's kind of that like really, hard to thread needle that we're trying to figure out with Lucas. And then also just kind of him and his sister being kind of the two main characters, the yin and yang of the whole thing, trying to figure out the balance of that relationship was complex. I like how it turned out. I don't know, Peter, what do you got to add?
Yeah, I would say one of the sort of starting points for Lucas was he is the boy who cried wolf. He had created this web series that he presented as the truth, as this weird mystery that he was whether or not that was true was a bit up in the air. And then when there's a bigger story that consumes his own little story, and he thinks he's the the most important person in the story, but he's not. And so finding that was a real big motivation for him. And then writing the character and talking to William, who plays him, one of the things that was really tricky to dial in is Lucas is a YouTuber. There's parts in the movie where he is putting on a performance for an audience that's inside the movie while also putting on a performance for the audience that's watching the movie, if that makes sense. He's performing to his YouTube followers, but we need him to perform for the audience that's watching Man Finds Tape. There's a lot of odd meta layers to it. So finding that performance within the performance was really tricky.
You already started telling about the relationship between the siblings. Why did you choose to make them siblings?
That's a good question. There was a version of the story early on where they weren't related, where the Lynn character was an investigative journalist who came to the town and she had grown up in the town, or was familiar with it, but she didn't have a relationship to the story. And talking about how hard it is to write character arcs into a documentary, it was kind of a bit of a cheat on our end to make both of them characters in their own documentary so that they could have an arc that is playing out as they're making the film. And so then that naturally lent to the brother and sister dynamic from there. So it kind of solved two problems at once.
Yeah, and I think too it was kind of just it was interesting to play with this dynamic that I think a lot of people probably in the world have experienced, where you're just like, you move away from a family member and they kind of are living one life and you're living another, and you kind of distance yourself from each other, especially in our story where these characters have lost their parents and that they're the only family they have left, and how easy it is to just kind of no longer be family. And, what we felt, the heart that we kind of tapped into that we wanted to attack was that feeling of like this brother and sister need each other, and they can only be the best versions of themselves together, and that this horrible event is happening, but it's bringing them back together. So it was more just Peter and I, when we're writing and coming up with stuff, it's less about what we want it to be and more what we just find interesting. It's kind of like, oh, there's material, there's something there, let's chase that and see where it takes us. And then it either takes us somewhere or we get bored with it and we go, never mind.
How is your relationship to this topic, to social media? And was it a specific critique you wanted to?
It certainly was, not just for social media, but media consumption in general these days. It's the inciting incident in the movie is a piece of footage where the people who are a part of it cannot acknowledge that they were a part of it. The monster, so to speak, is not letting them acknowledge what's actually happening to them. And so we wrote this several years ago, before AI deepfakes were quite as prominent as they are now. But that same theme of entire online generation who can be presented with video evidence of something and still can't admit what's really happening. That's what we kept chasing the whole time. And unfortunately for the world, slightly maybe fortunately for the film, that theme became more and more prevalent as it went on. But that's what we wanted to explore thematically, was what happens when people are shown something and just, even if they're a part of it, and they cannot get on the same page as to what is actually in the footage.
Yeah, and I think too, it's just kind of going off that. It's like, how do you hunt for a monster, in this day and age, in 2025? When, if I see some absolutely crazy video on social media, my default is to assume, well, it's fake. It's not real. Because it's just, that's what everything is now, there's so much crazy. So if something's just unbelievable, it probably is, which is the perfect opportunity for the unbelievable to hide kind of in plain sight sort of thing. So it's, we're trying to just kind of tap into the whole, okay, everybody deals with this on a daily basis, the consumption of media, social media, all this. What if this one part of it was real?
Yeah. And I think that I've always been an X-Files kid. I'm very much of the I want to believe personality when it comes to, you know, Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and whatnot. And so I think we very targetedly wanted to explore what would a monster look like in an age of constant surveillance, and could they exist. And so we sort of, with those boundaries, we kind of worked backwards to figure out, okay, how would a monster live in this day and age and still exist undiscovered.
As much as you criticize this media consumption, it's also a critique on religion.
It certainly is. I mean, one of the main characters is Reverend Endicott, who is involved in every aspect of this town and this story in unexpected ways. And I think it's sort of drawn from, at least for me, Paul can speak to his own as well, is growing up in an environment, particularly in America, where you can so easily see people move into religious movements to take advantage of the people there. There's so many televangelists and people who show up on TV to say, send me money, I'm going to cure all of your ills and all of this stuff. And it's, you can sort of see a phoniness to a lot of what's happening. And that's not to say that all religion is phony or anything like that. It's just there are a lot of people who take advantage of people who want to believe. And so sort of that's where we went with our religious themes, was it's people getting caught up in wanting to do good, and there's a force that's taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I agree. It's I wouldn't say it's a critique on religion, period. It's really the opportunity that something like that can create in a, you know, the film takes place in a fictional small Texas town, but where we live in Austin, you just drive 25-30 minutes in any direction and you're in just a middle of nowhere small Texas town. And we were intrigued by the concept of setting something there, and how there's just people who live their entire lives, birth to death, in these small places, and how if someone is going to manipulate people, control people, take power, such an easy opportunity is to become kind of a religious leader in a community like that. Again, not to say that everyone is that by any means, but it's just, it is an opportunity. It is a place for a monster to kind of hide in plain sight if they choose.